Ilari's arrival on Earth was unlike anything Kaelin had ever experienced. As an emissary of the Nixer, she glided down the ramp of her sleek, luminescent starship with an air of otherworldly grace. Her bioluminescent patterns shimmered like liquid starlight, reflecting the cautious curiosity she felt in this alien world. She wore a flowing garment that seemed to ripple with her movements, its texture alive with iridescent colors that shifted depending on her mood. Kaelin had been briefed extensively about the Nixer before her arrival. They were a highly advanced species known for their enigmatic blend of technology and artistry, and their cultural philosophy revolved around cycles of connection and solitude. The breeding season, a time of both physical and emotional vulnerability for the Nixer, was one of the few occasions they interacted deeply with other species. Ilari was here as part of that exchange, representing the Nixer in the hopes of fostering understanding with humanity. As she approached, her gaze swept over the small delegation of humans waiting to greet her. Her eyes, large and reflective like polished obsidian, landed on Kaelin. He felt a shiver run down his spine, not out of fear, but from the sheer intensity of her presence. "You are Kaelin," she said, her voice a melodious blend of resonance and clarity. "You are to be my assigned liaison." "Yes," Kaelin replied, bowing slightly. He offered a welcoming smile, though he wasn't sure how it would be received. "It's an honor to work with you, Ilari. I've studied your culture extensively, and I hope to make your time here comfortable and meaningful." Ilari tilted her head slightly, the movement both inquisitive and graceful. The soft, pale blue glow of her bioluminescence suggested mild interest. "Comfort and meaning are subjective, human, but I will observe your efforts." In the weeks that followed, Kaelin dedicated himself to making Ilari's stay as seamless as possible. He introduced her to Earth's diverse cultures, taking her to art galleries, botanical gardens, and historical landmarks. At first, Ilari's responses were clinical, her observations precise but detached. "This garden," she said one day, standing amidst a sea of blooming roses, "is a fascinating attempt at imposing order upon nature. Yet it is also wasteful. These flowers serve no functional purpose beyond aesthetics." Kaelin laughed softly, surprising her. "Not everything needs to have a function," he said. "Sometimes beauty is its own purpose." Ilari's bioluminescence flickered, a faint ripple of violet tinged with gold. She did not respond but lingered a moment longer, her delicate fingers brushing against a velvety petal. As the days turned into weeks, their interactions grew more personal. Kaelin found himself drawn to the layers of Ilari's personality, hidden beneath her cool exterior. Despite her initial aloofness, there were moments when her bioluminescent patterns betrayed emotions she could not or would not articulate. One evening, as they sat beneath a clear sky filled with stars, Kaelin shared stories of his childhood. He spoke of lying on the grass with his siblings, pointing out constellations and imagining stories about the universe. Ilari listened silently, her patterns shifting to a soft, steady green, the Nixer color for contemplation. "You humans are strange," she said finally. "You look to the stars and weave tales of gods and heroes, yet you remain bound to this one small world. Do you not long to leave it behind?" "Of course we do," Kaelin replied. "But those stories, they give us hope. They remind us that even if we're small, we're part of something bigger." Ilari's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "Hope is not a concept we value. It is ephemeral, like the flicker of a flame. It distracts from the realities of existence." "Maybe," Kaelin said with a shrug. "But sometimes, a flicker is all you need to find your way in the dark." For a moment, Ilari was silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, her bioluminescence brightened, a faint trace of amber mingling with the green. The turning point in their relationship came when Kaelin introduced Ilari to music. Nixer had their own forms of auditory art, but they were structured, mathematical, and devoid of the raw emotionality that characterized human compositions. Ilari sat stiffly as Kaelin played a haunting melody on an old violin, her patterns muted and steady. But as the music swelled, something shifted. Her bioluminescence flared in waves of crimson and gold, and she leaned forward, her eyes wide with an emotion she could not name. This is chaotic, she said when the music stopped. It defies logic, yet it resonates. Why? Kaelin smiled, setting the violin down. Because it speaks to something deeper than logic. It speaks to the soul. Ilari regarded him for a long moment, her patterns a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. Finally, she said, "Your soul, human, is an enigma, and I am not certain I wish to understand it." But the way her bioluminescence lingered on warm hues suggested otherwise. By the end of Ilari's breeding season, Kaelin felt they had forged a connection that transcended their differences. Yet, as her departure loomed closer, she grew increasingly distant. One evening, she confronted him with an air of finality. "Human, please leave me alone," she said, her bioluminescence a steady blue-gray, the Nixer color for resolution. "My breeding season is over, and I want to go home." Kaelin's heart sank, but he nodded. "If that's what you want, Ilari, I'll respect it. But just know you've left a mark on me, and I think I've left one on you too." For a moment, Ilari's patterns flickered, a brief burst of violet and gold that she quickly suppressed. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her form glowing faintly in the dark. Kaelin watched her go, his chest heavy with unspoken words. He didn't know if he would ever see her again, but deep down, he hoped their story wasn't over. The Nixer starship stood gleaming on the distant airfield, its contours sleek and organic, pulsating faintly like a living being. Ilari busied herself with preparations for departure, meticulously cataloging the genetic material she had gathered during her time on Earth. It was a ritualistic process, one that held immense significance for her people. Yet, despite her focus, her thoughts kept straying to Kaelin and the peculiar bond they had formed. Kaelin, meanwhile, wrestled with his own feelings. He had respected her wishes and stayed away, but her words, "Please leave me alone," echoed in his mind with a bittersweet resonance. Something in her bioluminescence that day had hinted at reluctance, perhaps even regret, and it haunted him. Determined to honor her boundaries but unwilling to let their connection end without a proper farewell, he decided to give her something that might speak to the part of her she seemed determined to suppress. He carefully crafted a small wooden figurine, a human interpretation of the Nixer star patterns he had learned from Ilari. It wasn't perfect, but it was infused with meaning. On the eve of her departure, Kaelin found himself standing at the edge of the airfield, the cool night air brushing against his skin. Ilari appeared, her bioluminescence muted, casting soft silver light around her. She regarded him with a measured expression, but her shifting colors betrayed her unease. "I thought I made myself clear," she said, her voice carrying a slight edge. "Why are you here?" Kaelin held up the figurine, his hand trembling slightly. "I just wanted to give you this parting gift, something to remember your time here." Ilari hesitated, her gaze flickering between him and the figurine. Slowly, she extended her hand, her fingers brushing his as she took it. The brief contact sent a jolt through both of them, though neither acknowledged it. She examined the figurine closely, her bioluminescence shifting to hues of violet and gold, the Nixer colors for curiosity and gratitude. "This is unexpected," she said softly. "You humans are peculiar creatures. You imbue meaning into objects, into gestures. It is both endearing and illogical." Kaelin smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not about logic. Maybe it's about connection." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, her patterns flickering in a complex dance. Then she straightened, her tone turning formal. "Thank you, Kaelin. I will consider this gesture. But now I must prepare to leave." He nodded, his heart heavy. "Safe travels, Ilari. And thank you for everything." Despite her outward composure, Ilari found herself unsettled as she boarded her ship. The figurine felt almost weightless in her hand, yet it carried an inexplicable significance. She placed it on a small shelf in her quarters, its presence both comforting and disconcerting. As the starship prepared for liftoff, Ilari stared out the window at the planet below. The thought of returning to her people and resuming her solitary existence felt like a relief. Yet there was a pang of something else, something she couldn't name. But fate had other plans. Barely a day into her journey, Ilari received an urgent communication from her superiors. A faction of Nixer, staunchly opposed to further relations with humanity, had initiated a political standoff. As a diplomat, Ilari was summoned back to Earth to mediate. The news was both a reprieve and a burden. Returning meant confronting the connection she had tried to sever, but it also meant fulfilling her duty to her people. Steeling herself, she ordered the ship to reverse course. When Ilari returned, Kalen was shocked to see her. She explained the situation with her usual calm precision, but there was an underlying tension in her voice. As she described the political conflict, her bioluminescence shifted erratically, betraying her inner turmoil. "I require your assistance, Kalen," she said finally. "You have a unique understanding of both human and Nixer perspectives. Your insight may prove valuable." He agreed without hesitation, though he was careful not to overstep. "Whatever you need, I'm here." In the days that followed, Kalen and Ilari worked closely together, navigating the delicate negotiations. Their interactions were professional, but the unspoken tension between them grew with each passing moment. Late one night, as they reviewed documents in a quiet study, Ilari finally broke the silence. "You are difficult to ignore," she admitted, her bioluminescence dimming slightly. "Your presence is both a distraction and a comfort. It is unsettling." Kalen looked up, surprised by her candor. "I'm not trying to unsettle you, Ilari. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think there's something between us. Something worth exploring." She stared at him, her patterns flickering with indecision. "It is not that simple. Nixer culture values emotional detachment. To indulge in whatever this is would be seen as a weakness." "Is it weakness?" he asked gently. "Or is it strength to let yourself feel?" Ilari didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked away, her bioluminescence shifting to a muted green, the color of contemplation. "I do not know," she said finally. "Perhaps that is what frightens me." As the negotiations progressed, Ilari found herself increasingly drawn to Kalen's optimism and resilience. He had a way of seeing the best in people, of finding hope even in the most dire situations. It was a quality that both baffled and inspired her. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, Ilari turned to him and said, "Your people are strange, Kalen. You find beauty in chaos, meaning in uncertainty. It is admirable." "And your people," he replied, "find grace in order, wisdom in restraint. That's admirable too. Maybe we're not so different after all." For the first time, Ilari allowed herself to smile. A small, fleeting expression that lit up her face in a way that made Kalen's heart ache. The city skyline was bathed in the amber glow of a setting sun, a palette of warm colors that made even Ilari pause and take in the sight. She stood on the balcony of the diplomatic headquarters, her bioluminescence faint, as if mirroring the quiet hum of her thoughts. Below her, Earth sprawled in all its chaotic beauty, a world so unlike her own, yet one that had managed to burrow into her guarded heart. Inside, Kalen worked tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming mediation. The political tension between the Nixer factions was palpable, and the outcome of the negotiations would determine the future of interspecies relations. Despite the stakes, he found himself distracted by Ilari. Her presence, even in silence, commanded his attention. Ilari, too, was struggling with her emotions. As a Nixer, she was taught to value detachment and logic above all else, especially after the breeding season. Yet, Kalen's quiet persistence and unyielding kindness had begun to stir something within her, a feeling that defied her upbringing. One evening, as they reviewed cultural notes for the mediation, Kalen leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You once told me your people believe in celestial alignments," he said, breaking the silence. "That the stars dictate the course of your lives. Do you really believe that?" Ilari tilted her head, considering his question. "It is not a matter of belief. It is a truth woven into the fabric of our existence. The alignments influence our cycles, our choices, our destinies. Kaelin smiled faintly. And what if the stars aligned for something unexpected? Something they didn't plan for? Her bioluminescence flickered, a subtle dance of violet and gold. The stars do not make mistakes, Kaelin. But perhaps they allow for exceptions. The weight of her words hung between them, unspoken yet understood. For the first time, Ilari entertained the possibility that their connection might be more than a fleeting anomaly. It might be one of those exceptions. As the day of the mediation approached, Ilari became increasingly introspective. She spent long hours in solitude, her bioluminescence a subdued silver gray. Kaelin respected her need for space, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was wrestling with something profound. Their interactions became quieter, more measured. One evening, after an intense day of diplomatic preparations, Ilari surprised Kaelin by asking him to accompany her on a walk through the city. He agreed, and together they wandered the bustling streets, their differences stark yet harmonized in the glow of streetlights. They stopped at a small park where a street musician played a mournful tune on a violin. Ilari stood still, her patterns shifting to a deep, contemplative green. "Your music," she said softly, "it carries a weight I cannot explain. It is as if it speaks to something primal." Kaelin watched her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "Music speaks to emotions we don't always understand," he said. "It's a language of its own." Ilari turned to him, her gaze intense. "Then what does this song say?" He hesitated, then replied, "It says, don't let go. Even when it's hard. Even when it feels like the universe is pulling you apart." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ilari reached out, her fingers brushing his. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Her bioluminescence shifted to a soft amber, a color of warmth and tentative hope. The mediation was a tense affair, with Nixer representatives divided on the issue of continued relations with humanity. Ilari, poised and articulate, presented her case with the precision of a seasoned diplomat. She spoke of the value of diversity, of the potential for growth through collaboration. Her bioluminescence pulsed steadily, reflecting her resolve. Kaelin watched from the sidelines, his admiration for her growing with every word. He marveled at her ability to navigate the delicate balance between loyalty to her people and openness to new possibilities. But not everyone was convinced. A senior Nixer official, Zareth, stood and addressed Ilari with a pointed question. "You speak of unity, yet you have allowed yourself to be influenced by human sentimentality. How can we trust your judgment?" Ilari's patterns flickered briefly before settling into a steady blue-gray. "My judgment is rooted in the principles of our people," she replied calmly. "But to dismiss the value of emotion is to deny a part of ourselves. The Nixer are not machines. We are sentient beings, capable of growth and change." Her words sparked murmurs among the delegates. Zareth's expression hardened, but he did not press further. Ilari's statement had struck a chord, even if it was a contentious one. That night, after the mediation adjourned, Ilari found Kaelin waiting for her on the balcony. The city stretched out before them, its lights shimmering like a reflection of the stars above. "You were incredible today," Kaelin said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "You stood your ground, even when it wasn't easy." Ilari turned to him, her gaze softening. "It was not easy," she admitted, "but I have learned that some things are worth the effort." He smiled. "And what about us? Do you think we're worth the effort?" Her bioluminescence flickered, a cascade of amber and violet. "You are an enigma, Kaelin. But perhaps the stars aligned for a reason. Perhaps this is an exception worth exploring." The evening after the mediation felt like the calm before a storm. The air was heavy with unspoken emotions, the kind that lingered between Ilari and Kaelin, pulling them toward each other while the weight of their realities pushed them apart. Ilari stood on the balcony of her temporary quarters, gazing up at the stars as if seeking guidance from the cosmic tapestry she had always believed in. Kaelin approached her quietly, his footsteps muffled by the soft carpet. He carried 2 steaming cups of herbal tea, a human tradition he had introduced her to during their late-night planning sessions. "You look like you're a million light-years away," he said, handing her a cup. "I might as well be," Ilari replied, her voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. "Even surrounded by your world, I feel the distance between us. Between what I am and what I am becoming." Kalen leaned against the railing beside her, the warmth of his tea radiating through his hands. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," he said. "Change is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely." She turned to him, her bioluminescence flickering with hues of violet and gold. "And yet, the closer I draw to you, the more I feel the pull of my own people. My place is with them. My purpose is with them. To deviate is unthinkable." "Maybe your purpose is bigger than either of us can see right now," Kalen said softly. "Maybe you're meant to be a bridge." The next day, the mediation resumed, and tensions flared. Zareth, the most vocal opponent of continued relations with humanity, proposed a resolution that would isolate the Nixer from Earth entirely. His argument was rooted in fear of losing their cultural identity, fear of emotional vulnerability, and fear of the unpredictable nature of humans. Ilari rose to counter his points, her tone measured but firm. "To isolate ourselves is to stagnate," she said, her bioluminescence glowing with steady blue-gray resolve. "The Nixer have always prided themselves on their adaptability, their ability to find harmony even in the unknown. Are we now to abandon those principles out of fear?" Her words were met with a mix of admiration and resistance. The room buzzed with murmurs, and Kalen could feel the tension building like an electrical charge. Despite her poise, he saw the subtle flicker of uncertainty in Ilari's patterns. She was walking a delicate line, and the stakes were higher than ever. That evening, Ilari and Kalen found themselves alone again, this time in a quiet garden illuminated by soft, bioluminescent lamps. Ilari's shoulders were tense, and her patterns shifted erratically, a sign of internal conflict. "I fear I am losing my people," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every step I take toward understanding humanity feels like a step away from them." "You're not losing them," Kalen said, his voice steady. "You're helping them see a bigger picture. Sometimes, being a leader means taking those steps first, even when it's hard." Ilari looked at him, her large, dark eyes reflecting the light around them. "You speak as though you understand my burden." "I don't," he admitted. "Not fully. But I do know what it's like to feel torn between two worlds. Between duty and something else." Her gaze lingered on him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to reach out. Not physically, but emotionally. "You are unrelenting, Kalen. Your optimism is a force I cannot ignore. And you're stubborn," he replied with a soft smile. "But that's what I like about you." The culmination of their bond came unexpectedly, during a private conversation between Ilari and Zareth. The elder Nixer had sought her out, his bioluminescence a cold, unyielding silver. "You tread dangerous ground, Ilari," he said. "Your actions risk alienating not only the humans but our own people. Do you not see the path you are carving?" "I see it clearly," Ilari replied, her pattern steady. "And I believe it is the right one. We cannot grow if we cling to the familiar out of fear." Zareth studied her for a long moment, his patterns unreadable. "You are brave," he said finally. "But bravery is not always rewarded." Ilari remained resolute. "Perhaps not. But it is necessary." Later that night, she sought out Kalen. She found him on the balcony where they had shared countless moments, gazing at the stars with a thoughtful expression. He turned when he heard her approach, his face lighting up with a smile. "Ilari," he said, "everything okay?" She stepped closer, her bioluminescence shifting to warm amber. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for your patience, for your insight, for being you." He chuckled softly. "You make it sound like I've done something extraordinary." "You have," she replied. "You've made me question everything I thought I knew. And while it terrifies me, it also gives me hope." Kalen's heart swelled at her words. "Hope's a good place to start." For a moment, they stood in silence, the universe stretching infinitely above them. Then, without thinking, Ilari reached out and placed her hand over his. The contact was electric, a tangible bridge between their worlds. "I do not know where this path will lead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I am willing to walk it. If you are." Kalen smiled, his grip on her hand gentle but firm. "I'm with you, Ilari. Wherever it leads." The air in the diplomatic chamber felt heavy, almost suffocating, as the final session of mediation commenced. The room was divided, Nixer delegates on one side, human representatives on the other. Ilari stood at the center, her bioluminescence a calm but resolute shade of blue-gray, a visual testament to her determination. On the sidelines, Kalen watched her with quiet admiration. She was a paradox. Disciplined yet compassionate, logical yet capable of profound emotion. He had seen her doubt, her fear, and her courage, and each facet of her only deepened his feelings. The Nixer Council leader, a towering figure named Caliph, called the room to order. His patterns glimmered with authoritative gold. "We are gathered here to decide the future of our relations with humanity," he began. "The debate has been vigorous, but now we must act." Zareth, ever the skeptic, rose to speak. His voice was measured but cold. "I acknowledge Ilari's efforts, but they come at great risk. To open ourselves further to humans is to invite chaos into the order we have cultivated for centuries." Ilari rose in response, her patterns shifting to a firm indigo, the Nixer color for resolve. "And yet, it is within chaos that we find growth," she said, her voice steady. "Humans are not perfect, but neither are we. To turn away from this opportunity is to stagnate. We must learn, adapt, and embrace the unknown." Her words sparked murmurs throughout the chamber. Caliph raised a hand to silence them. "You have spoken well, Ilari," he said. "But this council requires more than words. We need action. Proof." After the session adjourned, Ilari and Kalen convened in a quiet meeting room. Ilari's patterns shifted restlessly, betraying her unease. "Proof," she muttered. "What more can I give them?" "We'll find a way," Kalen said, his voice reassuring. "You've already shown them what's possible. Maybe it's time for both of us to take a step forward." Together, Ilari turned to him, her gaze searching. "Do you believe they can truly understand what we are trying to build? That they will accept it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe not all of them, but enough will. Enough to make it worth fighting for." Her bioluminescence softened to a warm amber, a flicker of hope piercing through her doubt. "Then we fight." The opportunity for action came sooner than expected. A crisis erupted at a Nixer research facility on Earth. A malfunction in their bioadaptive systems had caused a containment breach, endangering both Nixer and human researchers. It was the kind of situation that could easily escalate into a diplomatic disaster. Ilari and Kalen were dispatched to the scene, their partnership now tested in the crucible of crisis. The facility was a hive of activity when they arrived, its sleek, organic architecture marred by flashing emergency lights and frantic personnel. Ilari immediately took charge, her bioluminescence glowing with commanding gold. She coordinated the Nixer efforts to stabilize the system while Kalen worked with the human team to secure the affected areas. Despite the tension, their teamwork was seamless, a testament to the trust they had built. As the situation reached a critical point, Ilari made a bold decision. "We need to interface directly with the core system," she said. "But the risk is substantial." "I'll go with you," Kalen said without hesitation. She hesitated, her patterns flickering with concern. "The bioadaptive systems are calibrated to Nixer physiology. Could be dangerous for you." "Then it's a good thing I have you to guide me," he replied, his voice steady. Together, they entered the core chamber, a pulsating, bioluminescent heart of the facility. Ilari moved with precision, her patterns shifting to analytical blue as she navigated the system. Kalen followed her lead, his human ingenuity complementing her Nixer expertise. The work was grueling, and the tension in the room was palpable. At one point, a surge of energy caused a cascade failure, and Ilari instinctively shielded Kalen with her body. The contact was brief but charged, a reminder of the bond they shared. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice laced with concern. "I did," she replied simply, "because I could not bear the alternative." They pressed on, their combined efforts finally stabilizing the system. When the alarms ceased and the lights returned to their steady glow, a collective sigh of relief swept through the facility. Their success did not go unnoticed. The incident became a powerful symbol of what humans and Nixer could achieve together. Delegates who had been skeptical now spoke of the potential for deeper collaboration, their arguments bolstered by the actions of Ilari and Kalen. But it was not just the political landscape that shifted. That night, as they stood outside the facility, watching the stars, Ilari turned to Kalen, her bioluminescence a soft, radiant amber. "You risked yourself for me," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "Why?" He met her gaze, his expression open and unguarded. "Because I care about you, Ilari. More than I can put into words." Her patterns flickered, a cascade of violet and gold. "You confuse me, Kalen. And yet, I find myself drawn to you, despite everything. Maybe that's what makes it worth it," he said softly. "The not knowing, the figuring it out together." For the first time, Ilari allowed herself to close the distance between them. She placed her hand over his, her touch tentative but deliberate. "Then let us figure it out," she said. Together, as Section 5 concludes, Ilari and Kalen's bond becomes a catalyst for change, their partnership serving as a beacon of hope for both their peoples. But the challenges ahead remain formidable, and the journey is far from over. The final decision of the Nixer Council was delivered on a clear night, under a sky filled with stars. Delegates from both species gathered in the Grand Chamber, the bioluminescent walls casting an ethereal glow over the proceedings. Ilari stood at the center, her patterns calm and resolute, while Kalen watched from the gallery, his faith in her unwavering. Caliph, the council leader, rose to speak. His bioluminescence shimmered with a regal gold that commanded the room's attention. After much deliberation, this council recognizes the merit of continued relations with humanity, he announced, his voice resonant. This alliance will be fraught with challenges, but it holds the promise of growth for both our peoples. The chamber erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs, the decision both celebrated and debated. For Ilari and Kalen, it was a moment of validation, a recognition of the path they had dared to walk together. That evening, Ilari and Kalen found themselves alone once more, standing on the balcony of the Nixer embassy. The city below was alive with light and sound, a reflection of the vibrant energy that had come to define their journey. "You did it," Kalen said, his voice filled with pride. "You showed them what's possible." Ilari shook her head, her patterns shifting to a modest blue-gray. "We did it," she corrected. "I could not have done this without you." He smiled, the warmth in his eyes rivaling the glow of the stars above. "So what now? Where do we go from here?" She turned to face him, her bioluminescence softening to amber. "We move forward," she said simply. Together, her words carried a weight that went beyond the political. For the first time, Ilari allowed herself to fully acknowledge the depth of her feelings for Kalen. She stepped closer, the space between them disappearing like a bridge finally complete. "I once thought that the stars dictated everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now I see that they only light the way. It is up to us to walk the path." Kalen reached out, his hand brushing hers. "And if that path is uncertain?" Her bioluminescence flickered with a cascade of colors. Violet, gold, and green. "Then we will create it." Over the following months, Ilari and Kalen became symbols of the alliance, their partnership a testament to the power of connection across boundaries. They worked tirelessly to build a framework for cooperation, blending Nixer logic with human ingenuity. Their personal bond deepened as well, evolving into something neither had anticipated but both embraced. They shared their worlds with each other, Ilari teaching Kalen the intricate dance of Nixer bioluminescence, while he introduced her to the messy, chaotic joys of human creativity. Years later, Alari and Kalen stood together at the opening ceremony of the first interspecies research station, a beacon of collaboration between Earth and Nyxaris. The station's architecture reflected elements of both cultures, its design a harmonious blend of organic Nyxar aesthetics and human engineering. As they addressed the gathered crowd, their words carried the weight of their shared journey. This station represents more than scientific discovery, Alari said, her bioluminescence glowing with steady amber. It is a symbol of what we can achieve when we look beyond our differences. Kalen added, it's a reminder that even the smallest connections, an idea, a moment, a person, can spark something extraordinary. As the crowd erupted in applause, Alari glanced at Kalen, her patterns shifting to a warm gold. You were right, she said softly. About what? He asked, his tone teasing. About the stars, she replied. They didn't make a mistake. They gave us a chance. And we took it, he said, his smile widening. As they stood side by side, their hands brushing ever so slightly, the stars above them seemed to burn a little brighter, as if bearing witness to the future they had dared to forge. A future filled with hope, unity, and light. The end.